Thank you for taking the time to speak to us at JP Boats and Blades.
Well, thanks for inviting me to come and play with you guys this afternoon.
So, Graham, right off the back, why rowing? What drew you to the sport in the first place?
Ooh, that's an easy one. I had a next door neighbor whose older brother was rowing, and he invited me to come and watch him row at Germiston Lake to spend the day with him, because his parents were quite involved. And I went along to what was then the Germiston High School Regatta at VLC, and it was just kind of a sensory overload, seeing these big boats and all of these people, and walking through the boat shed. And if you've ever walked through an old boat shed back in the day, you'll remember this, when they're all made out of timber, that smell of spruce and varnish. And, just as a 10-year-old, you look at this and I was just awestruck, and I thought, wow, when I get to high school, I can do this. And it was in my brain, the seed had been planted, and it was 2 years of can't wait to get there. And I mean, and every day when I arrived, I was just waiting for the announcement that there's a rowing meeting, to listen. Every assembly and all the other sports were having their meetings. And I think it took a full week before we had our first rowing meeting. And boy, was I impatient. And that kind of kicked it off.
Well, fantastic. And of course, you went on to achieve great things in terms of rowing.
Well, yes, did I? I don't know. as much as one could achieve back then, because we were still isolated, so we weren't allowed to go to Worlds or to the Olympics or anything like that. I did ultimately end up going to Worlds when we came out of isolation. I was still kicking around, but very much in the twilight of my career. Also, I thought, because we were sort of semi-instructed to retire after that, because we had to make way for the new kids. And then 2 years later, I was back in the boat beating the hell out of them. And was kind of in the frame to go again in 95, but then I pulled the plug on that, basically because I started a new business, and I just couldn't afford the time. But I did end up coaching that unit. I was an assistant coach in 95, and then a 95-96 season, and then in 2000 again.
Excellent.
Coached with Paul Jackson in the Olympic squad.
Okay, so I guess in some ways that's answered the next question I was going to ask you, which is how has your time as a JP boy and ultimately as a JP oarsman impacted your adult life?
Ooh, tough one. I think rowing in general, whether you do it at JP or at any other school, I think it focuses one, because there's very little you can do outside of being absolutely committed to the people around you to make a boat go fast. It's not any one individual in a crew boat of 8 or 9 people, 9 if you include the cocks, and everybody plays their role, and if everybody doesn't play their role, you don't have success. And I think that kind of teaches you going forward in a work environment. I think, in the filmmaking industry, it's also a team sport. I don't know if you've ever, and I do, but if you've ever bothered to watch the credits at the end of a movie, there's probably 500 or 600 people that are involved in the process, and everybody, right down to the guy who makes the tea and coffee, his name goes up there because he was instrumental in keeping you functional while this was all happening. So it is very much a team game. And I think that's probably with anything in the workplace. It's the ultimate team sport. And I suppose if I learned anything from that, but also one of the other things I learned very early on was the more you put in, the more you get out. And, it's direct relationship. And every year you come back, and it doesn't matter what you did last year, you have to do it all over again. You're just, and I think one of the guys who summed it up really well for me was the guy who was being interviewed before the World Championships. He'd won the previous World Championships in the Norwegian lightweight double. And he said, it's great winning the World Championships because for that day you are the world champion. He said, but by the next day you start all over again. He said, you're last year's world champion. You're not the world champion. So, and if you approach it like that, then you know what you have to do when you come back is you have to make sure that you are the world champion again. And in lightweight rowing, that's incredibly tough because everybody's the same size and same weight and the same strength. And so the margins are so small, lightweight men and women for that matter, incredibly competitive events.
Absolutely. So, Graham, I know that you're familiar with the JP Boats and Blades initiative from last year and our achievements there. What are your thoughts about building a JP rowing community and suppose just working with current and past oarsmen to equip JP?
Yeah, I think it's a good initiative, but I mean, having been involved in other boat clubs like St. Benedict's, I coached there for a while, for a season, and then I was involved through my daughter at St. Andrews, and my wife ended up on the committee, and well, not really on the committee, we were committee members, but she was also on the board of the school. And it's incredibly important that you get a solid backing from the school. And when we kind of arrived there, it was quite different. You know, the rowing club used to go to the school cap in hand, much like JP does, and please ask him for a handout or a bailout or help us with some money. And the school reluctantly will hand over some money, which was a pittance compared to what it cost to run the boat club. It barely covered coaches' salaries, and all of the fundraising that the parents did ended up in going to pay coaches, where all the other sporting codes had full-time teachers that were coaches, people from the sports department. They had astros, they built new swimming pools, and it wasn't until one of the parents who was on the board as a financial guy looked at, did a little number sums exercise. They said, how much do you spend per child on hockey? And how much do you spend per child on swimming when you consider what they put in to rebuild the swimming pool and to do the hockey astro and all of that? And they came out with a really, really embarrassing number because they were spending, it was a ridiculous equivalent of maybe less than $500 per child on rowing, and when they were spending thousands in the other sporting codes, tens of thousands. And immediately we managed to get them to agree to R500,000 a year on year, which was a budget that was floated forward and covered every single year. Now, when you have an income like that, you can do things. You can plan, you can make plans, you can revolve your fleet. And in many ways, St. Benedict's runs the same way. I mean, obviously, they have their rowing fees, which are considerable. But then it's a boat club that fluctuates between 126 and 160 boys in membership. That's massive. Okay, and that just represents a huge financial income when each kid is paying upwards of 3,000 Rand a season. That covers a lot of bases. And then the school still puts money in, still allocates money for rowing, for buying equipment and all of that. So that net income doesn't go towards buying boats mostly. It goes towards other things, you know, in terms of the rowing boat. So until you can do that, you're always going to be going back to the old boys. And the thing is, you can only go there and eventually that well dries up. I've seen this at national level when we used to raise funds and you go and you knock on those same doors for tours every year. And you end up with a situation where you can't knock on those doors anymore. And eventually what happens is the union starts knocking on the doors you used to knock on. And then when you go there, say, no, but we actually already gave them money. And you have to go find new doors to knock on. So I don't think it's sustainable. It's a long-term sustainable thing. I said, it might get you over some short-term pain. And yes, you're going to buy a boat, but what are you going to do about the next one and the next one and the one after that? Because you can't keep going back to the same guys.
What I will say is that the kind of support that we've seen from the school certainly in the time that I've been involved with JP Boats and Blades, which is my reintroduction to the school, has been significantly better than when you and I were at school. When you and I were at school, we were really we were always in trouble basically. But you know, so now you know, looking at the school and the kind of support that rowing has got is fundamentally changed from when we were there. And I will say, which is fantastic news. And I will say, you know, with 2020, with the school's help, I would add, we were able to ultimately acquire 15 boats for the year. You know, 13 of those were bought on auction. And that changes the dynamics of the club. We go from potentially bringing in 50 guys to potentially bringing in 100, and that changes, as you've correctly pointed out, that changes the dynamic of the club, not only in terms of results on the podium,
income,
but in terms of income. Yeah. And there's another thing that we're launching, which is our CSI initiative, and we're hoping to ultimately sponsor guys that are not able to enjoy the sport, through CSI investment. So that's something else that's really important. So I guess in terms of the last question, and I know this is a difficult one. So from your time at Jeppe Rowing, can you give us one significant memory that you can recall with fondness?
Yeah, I mean, that whole season. Yeah, pick one. Pick one. I mean, I think that entire final season of us, where we took what was basically, we had 9, maybe 10 athletes that could have made the boat, and we produced an 8 that won the national championships. I just remember standing on the jetty after having won, and the Sachs boat pulled up next to us, which was largely made up of grade 11s or standard 11s, because they had ran a post-matric course. So these guys were, 12 o'clock shadows, and they were massive. They were men, we were boys. And Snowy Clark, I think, weighed about 63 or 64 kilos and was only about a beer crate and a dumpy high. And he stood next to this guy, and he literally stood under his arm, and I swapped vest, and Snowy pulled his vest on, and it came down to his knees. And we just given them the ultimate slap, because they were 3 boat lengths up on us halfway through the race. And everybody dialed it in, and we just rode them, we just rode the pants off them in the last 700 meters to win the race. But yeah, I mean, just everything about that season, the way it was set up, guys like Stuart Brown, who are probably the ultimate cheerleader, of the group.
Or troublemaker, depends how you see it.
Yeah, and troublemaker, but at the same time. And then, you had all sorts of like really interesting personalities in that outfit. Grant Neal, who I still see. Snowy, who I've lost a bit of contact with. I see Douglas a lot. Greg Short, I've lost contact with him. I've seen him once or twice. In fact, he pitched up at one of the rowing regattas. I think his son was rowing for Parktown. Malcolm Sharp, I haven't seen. Fritz hung around for a while, rowed a bit, and then coached a little bit at junior level when he was coaching Jeppe, and then I think at national level for juniors. Who else was in there? Oh, yes, David Keedle. I haven't seen him. And he was the bowman. Sharpie. Yeah, that's all of them. I think I got them all. But what a great bunch of guys to be with. And it was an assembly of this kind of odd, kind of unlikely bunch. And I mean, I think there were probably another 2 guys, maybe yourself and one other, as I recall. I can't remember, but there was probably like 10 people that could have made the boat. Maybe a Greg Murray could have forced his way in. But
he was our stroke as in the following year. So yes.
In the second 8, yeah. So outside of that, I mean, really the fall away in talent from there was quite pronounced, I thought, in terms of, you had these 8 guys who were or 10 guys who were right up in there in the block hole, and then look, we didn't have erg times in those days, thank heavens, because I've always maintained the damn things don't float. So I've never had to race somebody on a concept 2 at the start of a race. So, at the end of the day, the thing that floats is what counts. And it's, but that was probably best memories, was just, and then winning SA Champs was just like the cherry on top.
Excellent. Well, Graham, thank you so much for your time. We sincerely appreciate the time that you've taken and walking down memory lane again. Yeah. Everybody else out there, please feel free to go check out our website. That's jeppeboatsandblades.co.za. And until we chat again, and until we see each other online again, keep pulling together for gold. Thank you very much.